Kunan is a young aristocrat from a prominent family in the kingdom, and you'd think his life would be great, but take a look at his family sitting all around him. Well, that's something he can't do because he's blind. He possesses something known as the hero's scar, so ever since the day of his birth, he has been completely blind, and that has made him really depressed. His personal maid, Eiko, has to lead him everywhere he goes, but to give Kunan something to do, she encourages him to learn magic. After all, he does have a water magic crest, so it would be a waste if he didn't learn how to use it. He is introduced to his magic tutor, Jenny, and she says it's nice to finally see Kunan in the flesh. She introduces herself, and they start their first magic lesson for the day, a basic water ball spell. After teaching Kunan the incantation, he gives it a try and is able to create a small water ball. Jenny is impressed with Kunan's performance and says she can see that he has a high aptitude, but Kunan can't see anything, so he asks her to tell him what just happened. Jenny explains that he succeeded in creating a water ball around the size of an eyeball, but that was a really poor choice of words. She is worried that she might have offended him, but Kunan just came to the realization that magic can be eyeball-shaped, and if he learns enough of it, he might be able to make new eyes for himself. With newfound hope that he may one day gain his vision, Kunan becomes intrigued about the world around him and starts trying to learn as much as he can. Kunan's ancestor, the hero of this nation, Histor, defeated the demon lord, but he lost an arm and a leg in the battle. And since then, every so often, his descendants would be born with something missing, whether it be an arm, a leg, or eyesight. Which is crazy because imagine getting hurt so bad that your descendants end up suffering your injuries with you. Kunan may have lost the genetic lottery, but he's not going to let that hold him back any longer. He swears he's going to find a way to make new eyes for himself with magic, but practicing magic is actually really hard. He runs out of stamina after casting a few basic spells, and if he wants to create new eyes for himself, he can't stay like this, so he needs to find a way to strengthen his body. Normally, running would be a good way to raise stamina, but Kunan isn't exactly equipped for that, so Eiko suggests he could do some sword training instead, and she even has the perfect instructor in mind. Kunan spends the next few hours training with Master Oro to raise his stamina, and after that, Jenny arrives to continue her magic lessons with him. She can see that Kunan has been working hard with a sword, so she asks him if he wants to take a break since he would probably be tired from all the training, but he tells her he wants to keep going. In that case, Jenny suggests they should start by reviewing the water spell she taught him last time, but while she was expecting Kunan's progress to be the same as last time, to her surprise, he immediately creates 7 flawless water balls all at once, and she knows she did not teach him that. Meanwhile, over in the royal palace, Princess Marika has just been informed that a carriage has been prepared for her to go visit Kunan, but she doesn't really want to go. Kunan and Marika were betrothed to each other since he was born with the hero's scar, so it's an important political marriage, but she doesn't think Kunan likes her at all. She visits him every now and then so they can get to know each other, but he always acts so gloomy around her, and no matter how hard she tries to cheer him up, he would always say nothing matters because he's blind and can't do anything by himself. Even so, Marika's maid tells her she still has to go see him, so she eventually agrees and heads over to Kunan's home. However, this time, when she meets him, he seems much happier than he was the last time she saw him. She asks him if something happened to him recently, so Kunan explains that he recently fell in love with magic and it has given him hope again. He apologizes for always being so gloomy around Marika, and he asks her if she'd like to listen to some of his stories, since he has been learning a lot of fun things recently. By the end of the day, Marika leaves Kunan's house, and this time, she actually had a lot of fun playing with him, so she can't wait for her next visit. Later that night, back at Jenny's apartment, she's freaking out because she doesn't know what to teach Kunan for his next lesson. She took this job because she thought it would be easy money teaching a 7-year-old elementary magic for a few years, but after a few lessons, Kunan already mastered it. She wonders if she should start teaching him intermediate magic, but she can't risk doing that because while magic is convenient, it's not necessarily safe, so she might get in trouble for teaching him dangerous spells so soon. However, she's not going to give up yet because she's got bills to pay, and she's going to come up with a perfectly safe lesson for Kunan so she can keep collecting her paycheck. The next day, when Kunan and Jenny meet, she tells him that today's lesson is going to be a little different. He has already mastered the water ball, but that is a compound spell, so she wants him to try learning to adjust the various aspects of it. Kunan assumes she's talking about how he creates water, makes it float in the air, and maintains its ball shape mid-air, and she tells him he's right, but there's a lot more to it. Things like temperature, flavor, and color can also be adjusted, and to demonstrate, she creates 2 water balls in front of him. When he touches them, he notices that one is cold while the other is warm, and he seems to understand the concept that Jenny is trying to explain, so he decides to give it a try. Jenny is shocked to hear him say that, because she came up with this lesson intending to have him spend the next few weeks learning it, but just from her explanation, he already understands the basics of the technique and was even able to create juice-flavored water. Granted, it's still really hard for him to do, so he's going to need to practice a lot. The next day, Iko is getting ready to prepare a drink for him, so she asks Kunan to make some hot water for her, and he does so, but as he is sending the water over, Kunan sees the bowl of apples underneath it, and then wait a minute, Kunan just saw those apples. He panics and drops the water because this is the first time he has ever seen something, but when Iko asks him if that means his eyes are working, he explains that that isn't the case. It's more like he was able to use his magic to identify the object, which is an astounding development because it brings him one step closer to his goal of creating eyes with magic. Right now, all he can do is differentiate the red apples from the green ones, but he still has no idea what most colors actually look like, so he's going to have to do a lot of practice to get used to this. A little while later, Iko goes to report the good news to Kunan's father, and he is shocked to learn that Kunan can actually see now. Iko explains that he can only see within a small range near his body with his magic, but he can identify colors easily, so it's as good as regular vision. He is also able to read books now by tracing the colors of the pictures. He still can't understand words yet since he never learned how to read as a kid, but it's only a matter of time before he gets the hang of it, and Kunan's father is glad to hear it. Later that day, Kunan is getting ready for his usual magic lesson with Jenny, but while he's waiting for her to arrive, he gets an idea and decides to surprise Jenny by showing off how much his magic has improved. To do this, he creates a massive ball of red water in the air, and Iko thinks it looks beautiful, but a moment later, his family comes to check on him. And Kunan is so excited to see them that he loses control of the water ball and splashes it all over himself and Iko. Kunan's mother is horrified by the sight of him in this state, but he doesn't understand what the big deal is since he is just covered in a bunch of red water. Iko explains to him that the color red can be a bit unsettling to most people because it's the same color as human blood, but Kunan had no idea that blood was red to begin with. Kunan spends most of his free time reading and his father has taken notice, so he calls Kunan's brother, Ixio, into his office to tell him about his plans. He tells Ixio that he's thinking of sending Kunan to school now that he can take care of himself, but he is going to need Ixio to look after him as much as possible as his older brother. Sometime later, Kunan is summoned to the main branch to meet his father, but he's not sure what this is about since he hasn't done anything bad recently. When he finally meets his father, he says he has a very important announcement to make. According to Kunan's tutor, he has already finished most of the subject material taught at the school for noble children, even though he has never actually been to school. He was wondering if Kunan is curious about what going to school in person feels like, but Kunan says he's not particularly interested in attending school. After all, he wouldn't want to be a burden on his classmates, and he has his own goals he wants to achieve. He asks his dad if it's a problem that he doesn't wish to attend school, and it kind of is because school is mandatory for all noble children, and technically, Kunan is already enrolled, at least on paper. But due to his unique circumstances, his father got the king to make a special exception for him. However, now that Kunan has learned to see well enough to move about on his own, his father thinks it's time for him to consider going back to school. Kunan asks if he's trying to get rid of him because of the red water incident, and Kunan's dad is still a bit upset about it, but that's not the reason. He's saying this for the sake of Princess Marika, because if Kunan doesn't go to school, then it will make him look bad to the other nobles, and even if he isn't worried about his public image, as Marika's future husband, any negative opinions about him would affect her as well. Kunan understands the point his father is trying to make, so he agrees to go to school, but he still thinks it's going to be a waste of time since there's nothing new for him to learn there. His father tells him he doesn't actually have to attend classes. He just needs to pass all the advancement exams needed to qualify for graduation, and since he has already completed the syllabus with his tutor, it should be easy for him to pull off. A little while later, Kunan meets with Marika to inform her that he will be attending school soon, and she's really excited because that means she will get to spend more time with him at school. But Kunan is a little worried since if Marika is with him all the time, then all the boys who have crushes on her will get jealous, and they might take it out on him. Marika tells him he will probably be fine, but to be honest, that didn't sound very reassuring, so Kunan thinks he should probably get a new wand for self-defense. On the day of departure, Kunan and Ixio get into a carriage to leave for the academy, but to make the ride a little smoother, Kunan casts water magic on the wheels to act as shock absorbers. Ixio is impressed by how much Kunan's magic has improved, but Kunan says he has just become a little stronger, so it's not a big deal. He also apologizes since he's sure he must have worried his brother a lot with how depressed he was before, but now he is determined to survive no matter what, so Ixio doesn't need to worry about him anymore. Ixio is glad that Kunan has changed for the better, but then Kunan says he will make sure he succeeds even if it means the rest of the world has to perish, and that's crossing into villain territory. So Ixio is a bit worried again. They eventually arrive at the school, and Kunan can hear the voices of dozens of new people all at once. In the past, he would have backed out immediately without giving it a try, but not anymore. He asks Mirka to take his hand as the two of them walk into the building, and near the entrance, there's a professor waiting to meet him. Cass was asked to act as Kunan's guide and proctor for the advancement exams, but she's a bit worried because she has heard rumors about Kunan being a shy and reserved boy, and she's not sure how to handle someone like him who refuses to socialize, but to her surprise, a moment later, she sees Kunan and walk by with Mirka and Ixio, and they all seem to be chatting normally. She catches up to them and introduces herself as the professor who's going to be in charge of Kunan today, and Kunan says it's a pleasure to meet her. The bell rings soon after, so Mirka and Ixio have to go to their respective classes now. So Mirka says goodbye to Kunan and tells him to meet her in the cafeteria for lunch once he's done with his exams. Meanwhile, from the second floor, Mirka's older brother has been watching her, and he can see how happy she is with Kunan, so he could be supportive of her. But nah, he wants to be a hater, so he intends to confront Kunan the moment he finds him. Meanwhile, Kunan has just arrived in his exam room, and Cast is explaining the basics to him. There are 5 exams he needs to take, and normally, these exams are spread out to give students time to prepare, but an exception was made, so he will be allowed to take the tests back to back. Kunan apologizes to her for the trouble since his father and the king are practically best friends, so they probably pulled a bunch of strings to force the school to make an exception for him. Kunan then goes on a tangent about how close his father and the king are, but she really doesn't want to hear all this, since she prefers to stay out of the politics of high society. After the tests are complete, Cast heads to the faculty room to grade them, and she thought she was going to have to fudge Kunan's scores a little to make sure he passes since the king is backing him, but he actually aced every single test on his own, and for someone who has skipped school up till now, that doesn't make any sense. After the test, Kunan meets up with Mirka, and the two of them are about to have lunch together when all of a sudden, Lyle cuts them off. Mirka seems scared of her brother since he has violent tendencies, but Kunan has no idea that Lyle is Mirka's brother, and frankly, he doesn't care, because if he's making Mirka upset, then he's got to go. Kunan was about to make a move against Lyle, but just then, Ixio showed up and gets in front of him to try and smooth things over. He politely asks Lyle to leave Kunan and Mirka alone, and there's not much else he can do since he can't risk being rude to the 6th prince of the kingdom. However, while Lyle was yelling at Ixio, Kunan secretly cast a spell and gathered water droplets around the crotch of Lyle's pants before acting oblivious and yelling, "Oh no, Prince Lyle just peed his pants." Everyone's eyes instantly point towards Lyle's crotch, and even though he denies peeing on himself, the evidence is pretty damning, so to save himself from further humiliation, he is forced to leave. Ixio and Mirka are relieved that Lyle is gone now, but they both know Kunan had to be the one behind the pee thing. But Kunan avoids the question and changes the subject, asking what the others would like for lunch. After they've sat down, Kunan asks the others if they know why Lyle was making such a big fuss for no reason earlier, and Mirka tells him it was probably to keep her in check. Lyle is the 6th prince, while she is the 9th princess, so she is below him in the royal hierarchy, but since she is engaged to Kunan, a sorcerer who possesses the hero scar, it puts her in a much higher standing status-wise. He probably feels threatened by the idea of Mirka surpassing him in the hierarchy, so he was trying to establish dominance, but he's not necessarily a bad person. Kunan kind of feels like he may have overdone it earlier, so he wonders if he should apologize for what he did, but the others immediately shut down the idea and tell him Lyle got what he deserved after the stunt he pulled today. Time goes by, and back home, Kunan has started learning how to change the texture of ice to make it feel like other things. This time, he made the ice feel like an apple, and his teacher is impressed, but she tells him he should try feeling more things so he can use different textures. The day for the final exam soon rolls around, and upon arriving at school for the day, Ixio notices that Kunan has been touching the horse a lot recently. He asks what that's all about, and Kunan responds, saying he's just gathering some samples, but Ixio has no idea what that's supposed to mean. A little while later, Mirka shows up to greet Kunan, and he tells her he's going to miss being able to talk to her at school all the time since this will be his last day here. But Mirka reminds him that they've still got the whole day ahead of them, so there's no need to say goodbye yet. They all head into the exam room, and Kunan is excited because this is his first time actually being in a class with other students. But he's also going to miss all the private time he used to spend with Professor Cast back when he took his tests. Cast tells him she's still going to be paying attention to him even if there are other students here, and Ixio notices that Kunan and Cast seem to have gotten really close. Kunan says it's natural that they would become friends since he learned a lot about Cast through their discussions during Kunan's tests. Like how Cast only became a teacher here because she had a crush on one of the men who applied for the role, but the guy ended up failing while Cast passed, so she didn't know what to do and decided to just keep teaching. The others think it's good that Kunan and Professor Cast are getting along, but they also think it's a bit weird for her to be venting about her love life to a child. Just then, a bunch of the other kids in class approach the group and ask Ixio and Mirika to introduce them to Kunan since they haven't had a chance to talk to him yet, and since they are being so straightforward. Kunan formally introduces himself. Truth be told, he was a little concerned about the fact that no one ever approached him when he was with Ixio or Mirika, so he was starting to think the two of them had no friends at all. Mirika tells him that her friends only kept their distance because she told them she wanted to spend some quality time with him without being bothered, and Kunan is relieved to hear that because he wouldn't know what to do if Mirika or Ixio ended up being total loners. That said, he personally doesn't mind being alone or having no friends, so it wouldn't bother him that much. A little while later, the exam is about to begin, but Lyle is still out in the hallway, staring out the window and acting all cool and mysterious. His lackeys tell him that the final exam is about to begin, and Lyle says he's too important to be worried about something like that, but then they remind him that he will have to repeat the year if he misses it, so he has no choice. Meanwhile, back in the classroom, Kunan is busy feeling up a pigeon next to the windows when Cast announces that the test is about to begin, so everyone should take their seats. Mirika tells Kunan she saved him a seat next to her, but before he could accept her offer, Lyle gets in between them and starts staring daggers at Kunan. Ixio can't interfere, but he recalls hearing a few of the royal maids talking about how much of a screw-up Lyle is, but they would never say that to his face because he is still a member of the royal family. The reason Lyle acts out so much and is always so angry is because he knows that even though people try to act respectful around him, they all probably make fun of him behind his back. However, while he's in the middle of his thoughts, Kunan suddenly grabs his hand and formally introduces himself. Lyle freaks out and says he didn't give permission for Kunan to touch him, but Kunan reminds him that they are going to be brothers-in-law eventually, so they should get to know each other. He starts feeling Lyle's hand, and from the texture of his skin, Kunan can tell that Lyle must have a handsome face. That was a nice thing to say, but Lyle rarely ever receives genuine compliments like this, so he doesn't know how to handle it and turns to Mirika to ask her if there's something wrong with Kunan. Mirika finds the whole thing funny, and so does everyone else in class, so they start laughing, and at first, Lyle thinks they are all laughing at him. But Mirika explains that they are laughing because this is the first time anyone has ever seen him get so flustered. Lyle denies being flustered and tells Kunan to let go of his hand already, but Kunan holds on for a few extra seconds and tells Lyle his voice sounds strong too. Lyle initially didn't like Kunan and was planning to be mean to him to assert dominance, but now he's not sure how to react. Cass then gets everyone's attention and tells them all to be seated because she's about to begin the test. By the end of the day, the test is completed and Cass has finished grading everyone's papers, so she says she's going to announce the results now. She begins writing on the board, and everyone eagerly watches to see their results, but it turns out that they all passed, so they all get to graduate. Afterwards, Kunan and Ixio get back on the carriage to head home, and everyone waves goodbye to him as he leaves. Kunan tells them he had a lot of fun today, and he tells Cass that if she's still looking for a boyfriend, then she should consider Ixio since he's still single, but Ixio says he never agreed to that, and Cass is starting to regret talking to Kunan about her love life a little. Additionally, Lyle learned a lot from his interaction with Kunan, and he's going to make an effort to be nicer from now on. A few days later, now that Kunan has graduated, he is focusing on learning some new spells, and Jenny is currently testing him on everything he has learnt. She asks him to make a spinning ball of water, split it into 10, and then color and texture each one individually, all of which Kunan is able to pull off with little difficulty. Jenny tells him he did well, but Kunan says he's not done yet because he actually figured out how to take the customization even further. He then proceeds to turn one of the water balls into a dove and has it fly into the air. Jenny can't believe what she just witnessed and falls to her knees because even master water mages wouldn't be able to pull off something like that so easily. Later, while having tea with Kunan, Jenny says she has something important to tell him. Kunan understands, so he asks Aiko to give them some privacy. And once they are alone, Jenny tells him that there's nothing left for her to teach him. In fact, she hasn't had much to teach for the past few months since she's just meant to instruct him in the use of elementary magic. But at this point, Kunan is a better mage than she is, so there's no reason for her to continue being his teacher. Kunan gets up and tells her that she's actually a great teacher because he has really enjoyed all the desperate little tricks that she would turn into lessons for him. She may not be on the level of more advanced mages, but her insight gave him new hope in life, and he truly values it. Jenny appreciates him, saying that since she had to work really hard and rack her brain to come up with those lessons, and it is becoming too much for her to handle. Kunan asks her if she's saying this because she thinks the salary isn't worth all the trouble, because if that's the case, he asks his father to give her a pay raise. But Jenny tells him it's actually the opposite. She feels guilty about receiving such a high salary when she does so little. Kunan tells her that the lessons she comes up with are worth every penny, but Jenny says she's already hit her limit. Her brain is bone dry when it comes to ideas now, so she tells him he deserves to have a better sorcerer as his teacher instead of her. Kunan begs Jenny to stay because he wants to continue having her as his magic teacher, but there really isn't much she can do for him at this point. After saying goodbye, Jenny leaves the mansion, and as she is walking away, she thinks to herself that Kunan is undoubtedly a genius, and it's only a matter of time before he becomes one of the greatest mages on the continent, so she's going to do her best to keep up with him by training her own magic. The next morning, Kunan is informed by Iko that his usual academic tutor, Miss Flora, has just resigned as well. He's shocked to hear this, but it does make sense since he has already finished the curriculum and graduated from the Noble Academy, so he doesn't need to be tutored anymore. Kunan still wishes he had gotten to say goodbye before she left, so he decides to write her a thank you letter later. And Iko thinks that's great, but while Kunan is at it, she asks if he could ask Flora if she knows any 20-year-old single men who would be interested in marrying her. Kunan feels hurt that Iko wants to get married and leave him behind, and she's not trying to make him feel bad, but she does need to think about her future as well. Besides, she's sure that Kunan will be alright on his own, but he says he's not alright at all. Jenny already left, he just found out that Flora resigned, and now Iko wants to leave as well. At this rate, he won't have anyone left soon. That night, during dinner, Kunan tells his father about Jenny quitting and how she said he should find a master sorcerer to become his teacher if he wants to continue learning. Ixio thinks about it for a second and recalls a rumor about an extraordinary royal sorcerer. Their mother recognizes the description and asks Ixio if he is talking about Zanel Finral, because he is famous throughout the capital for his immense power and good looks. He would be a perfect candidate for Kunan's new magic teacher, but their father says there's a major problem with that plan. They can't hire Zio. As a royal sorcerer, the only people allowed to give him orders are the king and other members of the royal court. On top of that, Zio rarely leaves the royal castle, and even meeting with him is highly regulated, so the chances of hiring him as a magic instructor are slim, but he says he will at least ask the king to see if there's anything he can do. A little while later, the Grand Master Mage at the royal castle receives a report that says an apprentice-level sorcerer boy is asking to study under one of his royal sorcerers. This is practically unheard of, even for the son of a noble who is best friends with the king. The Grand Master's apprentice happens to be Mirika's older sister, so she personally does like Kunan, but royal sorcerers aren't swayed by status or power. The Grand Master initially intended to reject the request regardless of how well connected Kunan is, but then he started reading Kunan's file and that's when he realized this. This kid might actually be special. A few days later, Kunan and his dad head to the royal capital because they just received permission to meet with the royal sorcerer. They are both honestly surprised that it works since almost no one ever gets an opportunity like this. And if things go well with the meeting, then Kunan might be able to get him as a tutor after all. Kunan thanks his father for pulling the strings to make this happen, but his dad tells him there was no nepotism involved. The royal sorcerers simply took an interest in Kunan after reading his file, although he has no idea why. To pass the time, Kunan decides to make a cat out of water, and it looks like his spell control has gone up by a lot since it looks and feels exactly like a real cat, although he still hasn't figured out how to make it move naturally or make sounds, but his dad absolutely loves it. Upon arriving at the castle, the two of them are met by Lady Raisha, so Kunan gives his usual greeting. But then he is informed that Raisha is actually the second princess, making her Mirika's older sister, so Kunan says he's happy to finally meet his future sister-in-law. Raisha notices that Kunan's dad is carrying a cat, and she thinks it's really cute, but when he puts it down, Kunan cancels his spell and the cat turns back into a puddle of water. She is amazed that a child could have such a level of mastery because she had no idea that it wasn't a real cat, and that means Kunan is a lot more skilled than she thought he would be. She offers to lead him to the Black Tower right away, but before he goes, Kunan's dad informs him that he has an audience with the king later today, so he asks if Kunan will be alright getting home by himself. Kunan says he is perfectly capable of traveling alone, so his dad says he will arrange for a carriage to come pick him up later in the day. As Kunan and Reisha are walking through the halls, Kunan starts asking her a bunch of questions about advanced magic, but he's talking way too fast for her to keep up with him. She tells Kunan that she's still new here, so she isn't prepared to answer all of his questions. There are 10 princesses and 7 princes in this kingdom, and usually, they would all have to compete with one another in terms of achievements in order to inherit the kingdom. But Reisha relinquished her right to the throne in order to pursue a career as a sorcerer here. She's also a bit concerned that Kunan might get dragged into the royal succession battle, but just then, she notices that Kunan isn't walking anymore, he's sliding. She asks how he's doing that, so he explains that he just created a layer of ice under his feet to reduce friction. He asks her if she would like to try it as well, and Reisha seems really excited about it, but first, it's her job to fill Kunan in on the ground rules of the Black Tower. First, he shouldn't carelessly get involved with any factions, and he shouldn't sign any shady contracts or say anything that could get him in trouble later. And now that that's out of the way, she asks Kunan to turn her shoes into skates. A minute later, the two of them are skating down the halls without a care in the world, but it's causing a huge commotion, so a few of the guards try to get them to stop. However, they are way too fast for them to catch up. Just then, the knight captain, Dario, happens to be passing by when he notices what's going on, so he starts chasing after Kunan and Reisha and orders them to stop skating in the halls. Kunan is starting to get a little concerned that they might be in trouble, so he asks Reisha if they should stop, but she says she's having way too much fun, so they just need to go even faster to shake Dario off. Unfortunately, Dario never skips leg day, so he is easily able to catch up to the two of them and delivers a long scolding out in the courtyard afterwards. After that, Kunan is finally taken to meet Akthard, the Grand Mage, and as soon as Kunan meets him, he can tell that Akthard is the real deal. Akthard recalls hearing that Kunan has a water crest on his body, and Kunan confirms this, explaining that it's on his right shoulder. Akthard takes a look and discovers that Kunan's crest is a 2-star, but Kunan has never heard of that classification before, so he asks what it's supposed to mean. Akthard explains that there are 7 different crest types, the 4 elementals, and then there's light, dark, and foul. They also have ranks, and 2-star is one of the most common since it's second to last. Reisha mentions that she also happens to be a 2-star with a wind crest, and if that's the case, then Kunan assumes Akthard must be higher. Akthard asks what led him to that conclusion, so he explains that the magic density around him is much higher than that of Reisha's, kind of like regular cheese compared to premium blue cheese. Akthard thinks that's a fun way to look at it, but he also doesn't like being compared to cheese, so he tells Kunan never to call him that again. That aside, Akthard informs Kunan that he has a 4-star crest, but having a low or high crest number doesn't necessarily indicate one's skill with magic. It just indicates the amount of total energy they can use. Anyway, now that the boring information is out of the way, Akthard invites Kunan to come down to the courtyard so the fun can officially begin. Downstairs, a bunch of the royal sorcerers all gather to witness Kunan's magic since they heard that he's really amazing. Akthard says he wants Kunan to take a little test, and Kunan is all for it since if he passes, then he might be allowed to have a royal sorcerer as his tutor. Akthard calls over one of the sorcerers, Victo, and asks him to start the test, and he proceeds to cast a few dozen water balls around himself. Akthard then informs Kunan that he needs to overcome Victo's spell with his own magic, and Kunan is at a loss for words because this is the first time he has ever had to do something like this. He remembers Jenny explaining that the water ball spell allows you to create water, or alternatively control water that already exists, but he never even considered the idea of taking control of water created by another mage. He decides to give it his best shot and effectively begins wrestling with Victo for control of the water, but it's a lot harder than he anticipated. By the time the test is over, Kunan had only managed to claim 2 of the water balls, and at first, he is disappointed in himself because he thinks he did poorly, but on the contrary, he is informed that he did really well. In truth, Victo wasn't expecting him to be able to take any of his balls, let alone 2, so he has exceeded all their expectations. Although Akthard would still like to see more of Kunan's magic, so he asks him if he would be willing to do a few more tests. A few minutes later, Kunan creates a massive water balloon in the middle of the grass, and Akthard is having the time of his life bouncing up and down on it, and Kunan is wondering if it's really alright for the Grand Master to be messing around like this on the clock. Akthard asks Kunan how he managed to create this thing, so he explains that it's just an ordinary water ball that he tweaked to give it extremely elastic properties. In fact, He could probably make it strong enough to bounce Acthard all the way up to the second floor of the castle, but Acthard tells him he has had enough bouncing for today. A moment later, Raisha goes up to Kunan and asks him if he can make other things out of water, like humans for instance. Kunan says he can, and to demonstrate, he creates a doll of Eco, but he still hasn't figured out how to make it move naturally. He has attempted to make it fly before, but it looked really creepy, so he doesn't do it often. Regardless, Raisha and the others ask him to do it anyway, so Kunan makes the Eco doll fly through the air. But as it goes past one of the windows, a few castle maids mistake it for a ghost, so they all start freaking out, and the knights eventually get called, so they head down to the courtyard and start yelling at all the sorcerers for causing so much trouble. Everyone starts trying to pin the blame on Victo for some reason, and Kunan is feeling down because he didn't think he would get scolded twice on his first day here. Acthar tells him there's no use sulking over what has already happened, but just to be safe, he suggests that the next time they meet, they should discuss magic over lunch instead. Kunan asks if this means he passed Acthard's test, but considering how much fun he was having earlier, he thought the answer would be obvious. He says he will personally take care of assigning a royal sorcerer to be his teacher, and Kunan is overjoyed to hear that. However, he does still want to clarify a few things because he wouldn't want this to be seen as him supporting a particular royal faction. But Raisha tells him he doesn't need to worry about that since royal sorcerers aren't involved in politics at all. Kunan is happy to hear that, but before he leaves, there's one more question Acthard would like to ask him. He wants to know what Kunan's goal with magic is, so he explains that he is studying so that he can one day create new eyeballs for himself with his magic. Everyone thinks that's a noble thing to aspire towards, and Kunan is happy that they all support his dream, but as he is preparing to leave for the day, he discovers his father waiting for him, and he does not look happy. He apparently heard about how Kunan got scolded for causing trouble here 2 times today alone, and he wants an explanation, as soon as possible. Raisha tries to explain that it isn't his fault, because she was the one who asked him to do the things he got in trouble for, but his father says that doesn't matter because a sorcerer is always responsible for the consequences of their magic. After all, one who possesses the power to potentially kill thousands shouldn't be able to use the excuse of "I was just following orders," so if listening to orders will result in others getting hurt, then you should always refuse to do it no matter what. Kunan realizes his dad is right, so he apologizes and promises not to make the same mistake again. His father then starts heading home, but Kunan was planning to have dinner with Mirika tonight, so he's going to hang back a little longer. But speaking of his dinner, Raisha reminds him that he should probably start heading to the other wing of the castle because he's supposed to be meeting Mirika in a few minutes. Kunan had no idea that it was already so late, but he doesn't want to run all the way there because he would end up being all sweaty. In that case, Raisha suggests they could use some magic to fix the problem, but Kunan isn't sure what she means. She reminds him that she is a wind mage, so she can use her magic to fly them over there. All she needs is a platform for them to ride on. Kunan creates another water balloon, and after the 2 of them get on it, Kunan makes it float into the air, and once they are high enough, Raisha uses her wind magic to propel them forward. It's both a terrifying and exhilarating experience, but unfortunately, Raisha hadn't put much thought into how the 2 of them were going to land, so they end up crashing to the ground. Luckily, the water ball breaks their fall, but they happen to land right in front of Dario, and he does not look happy because this is the 3rd time he has caught them causing trouble. So while Mirika is still getting ready, Kunan and Raisha are getting scolded again. Mirika is eventually informed that Kunan has arrived, so she immediately runs to the front door to meet him so they can get their date started. A little while later, they arrive at the restaurant as planned, and once they are seated, Mirika asks Kunan to tell her about his day at the Black Tower. Kunan informs her that he had a wonderful time there. He got to meet Mirika's sister and a bunch of the other mages there. He also apparently passed the test, so he's going to get an instructor after all, but he's not sure who it's going to be yet. The maid in charge of them notices that Kunan seems to be talking an awful lot while Mirika just listens, but she seems to be happy, so it's not a problem. The reason he's talking so much is because he doesn't get to see Mirika often now that they've graduated, so he wants to say everything all at once while he has the chance, and he promises her that once they get married, he's going to make sure they get to spend as much time together as she wants. That line made Mirika's heart flutter so much that even after the date was over, she spent the next few hours kicking her feet in bed because she was so happy. Later on, we see Kunan back at home, and he's busy writing a report in his room, but just then, Aiko calls out to him and asks for a little help with his magic. Kunan heads outside to see what she wants, so she asks him to create some soap bubbles so she can wash the clothes better. Kunan agrees to help, but he's a little annoyed since he needs to go back to writing his report after this. However, Eiko tells him that it's not good for him to stay cooped up in his room all day, because if he doesn't get enough sunlight, then he will never grow taller. Kunan asks if girls really prefer taller guys, and she says most do, but she will always like him whether he's tall or remains a little munchkin. After Eiko is done with the laundry, she and Kunan lie on the grass for a while, and he asks her if any letters arrived for him today, but as far as she knows, there haven't been any letters addressed to him recently. She asks if he's expecting something specific, so he tells her he was just waiting for the confirmation from the tower about who his instructor is going to be, but it seems they haven't decided yet. Well, technically, they have already decided, but most of the other mages are just too scared to go call the guy down. One of the mages eventually heads to Xion's room to tell him that the Grand Mage has a task for him, but he is met by a mountain of messy papers, and when Xion finally gets up, he threatens the guy for messing with his valuable sleep time. Xion asks what he's doing here, so the guy informs him that the Grand Master wishes to speak to him, and that gets his attention. A few days later, Kunan receives a letter informing him that a teacher has finally been assigned to him, and Eiko is really happy for him. But when she hears that Kunan's teacher is going to be Zan, the legendary mage known all throughout the kingdom, she can hardly believe it. All the women in the kingdom would practically sell their souls to get a chance to meet him, and since he's going to be Kunan's teacher, that means she will have a ton of opportunities to talk to him. Later on, we see Raisha and Mirika together in the royal castle, and they are on their way to meet Xion because according to the rules, a royal sorcerer still needs to receive a direct order from a member of the royal family in order to go outside, so they plan to order Xion to guard Mirika. This also gives her a good excuse to visit Kunan, but Raisha is still a bit salty about Xion being chosen because she wanted to be Kunan's teacher instead. Along the way, Mirika runs into two more of her older sisters, Everil and Lydalia, and while Mirika may have a good relationship with Raisha, the same can't be said for these two. They begin talking about how talented and amazing Kunan is, and that, in comparison, Mirika is a plain loser who's just mooching off his glory. But Raisha cuts them off and tells them to get out of the way if they don't have anything important to say. The two are pissed, but they know they can't stand up to Raisha, so they run off. Later that day, Kunan is in his garden, awaiting Xion and Mirika's arrival with Eiko, and once the carriage pulls up, he gets up to greet Xion. However, to his surprise, Mirika is the first to step out of the carriage. He wasn't expecting her to come today, but he is happy all the same because it's always a pleasure to see her. However, as he is chatting with Mirika, Xion steps down from the carriage and Kunan falls silent the second he steps into detection range. As for Eiko, she is geeking out internally at the sight of Xion, but she doesn't want to make a fool of herself, so she is doing her best to keep a straight face on. The magical energy Kunan is feeling from Xion is incredibly dense, and he can immediately tell that Xion is far better than any of the other royal sorcerers he met the other day. Mirika notices that Kunan went really quiet all of a sudden, so she asks if something is wrong, but he says it's nothing. He introduces himself to Xion, but Xion makes it clear that he doesn't actually want to be here. The only reason he agreed to come was because the Grand Master told him there was an interesting young mage here, but he doubts Kunan is going to be able to live up to his expectations. Dario then speaks up and formally introduces himself to everyone as the knight sent to protect Mirika and Xion during this trip. Kunan says it's nice to see Dario again, which surprises Mirika since she didn't know Kunan and Dario had met before. So Kunan explains that Dario is the knight who scolded him and Raisha 3 times last time they visited the capital, but he was just doing his job. Anyway, a few minutes later, Kunan, Xion, and Mirika all sit together at a table in the garden, and at first, Kunan was completely ignoring Xion because he was preoccupied talking to Mirika, but Xion quickly gets tired of watching the two of them flirt, so he slams his fist on the table and tells Kunan he wants to talk about magic now. He is trying to make Kunan understand how insignificant his knowledge of magic is by asking him questions far outside his depth, but Kunan seems like he's ready for anything. Xion asks Kunan if he knows about compound spells, so Kunan states that they are basically spells made by splitting and rearranging the magic circle of an original spell to get new effects. Xion asks Kunan how many sections he can split a spell into at the moment, and he was expecting Kunan to say something like 5 or 10, but to his surprise, Kunan reveals that he can actually handle 31 different sections at once. He can sometimes go up to 32, but his success rate at that level is inconsistent right now. Xion is genuinely surprised to hear that Kunan is capable of such complex magic, and he is starting to understand why the Grand Master was so interested in this boy, but he's still better. He proudly announces that he can go all the way up to 50 sections, and Kunan is astounded because he has no idea how Xion pulled it off. But before they go any further, Xion asks Kunan how he managed to get past the 20-section hurdle, since most mages get stuck there. Kunan explains that it was easy to overcome the bottleneck once he started layering the spells. Xion is impressed that Kunan was able to figure out such an advanced concept all on his own, and it makes sense that the other royal sorcerers were fighting to become Kunan's teachers because a boy with this kind of talent is extremely rare, but he still plans to test Kunan to see how far he can go. Kunan begs Xion to show him what a 50-layered spell looks like, but Xion sees no point in doing that since he won't be able to replicate it by seeing it only once. And besides, he hasn't officially accepted Kunan as his student yet, so he's still got to prove himself as worthy. Xion creates an earth wall using magic and tells Kunan that he is going to need to destroy it using magic if he wants to become his student. He also mentions that he heard about Kunan's waterbed spell from Raisha, so he asks Kunan to make one for him so he can rest while he does his test. At first, Xion thought it would just be a comfortable seat to observe Kunan's progress from, but the second he touches the waterbed, he passes out because of how comfortable it is, and Iko doesn't blame him because the same thing happened to her when she tried it. On Kunan's end, he inspects the rock wall to see if there are any structural issues he can exploit, but the thing is rock solid and completely smooth across the board. It also has Xion's dense magic power residing within it to maintain its hardness over time. He can tell that the spell used to create the wall has over 40 sections in it, and he still has no idea how Xion manages to use so many sections at once, but it doesn't make a difference in this case because he already knows the perfect way to destroy the wall. That said, he would rather do it with Xion watching, and so he sits back down to continue talking to Mirika until Xion wakes up. 2 hours later, Xion finally gets up from his nap, and seeing the wall still in one piece, he asks Kunan if he gave up on trying to destroy it. However, Kunan tells him that's not the case, he just hasn't started yet. He asks if Xion is ready for him to begin destroying the wall, and Xion tells him to go ahead, so Kunan casts the bubble spell he used recently. Xion is impressed because he can tell what Kunan is trying to do, so he asks Kunan how he managed to come up with this solution. He explains that while it is certainly a very sturdy earth wall, at the end of the day, it is still made of dirt, so he figured that if he covered it with enough water, then it would eventually become saturated and wash away on its own. Xion tells Kunan that he did really well, because most people, when faced with a test like this, would immediately opt for brute force, but Kunan chose to use finesse instead, and that is a valuable skill for a mage. He tells Kunan that from now on, he is officially his student, and Kunan is extremely happy because not only does he have a wonderful master, but he also has Mirika by his side. However, Xion cuts Kunan's flirting short and tells him he won't have much time for that anymore because he has thousands of things to learn and tons of research to do. And on that note, he asks Mirika what she plans to do. He tells her that Kunan already has exceptional talent, and it's only a matter of time before he becomes one of the most influential people in the kingdom, and when that happens, there will be no shortage of women asking for his hand in marriage, so how will Mirika stand out then? Mirika understands what he's trying to say, but Kunan tells Xion to stop being so mean to her. Xion says he didn't mean anything bad by it since he's actually rooting for her, but Kunan tells him there are still some things you shouldn't say like that. And with how he acts, Kunan wouldn't be surprised if Xion was unintentionally mean to the girl he loved at one point, and someone else was able to steal her away from him because of it. Those words hit really close to home for Xion just now, but he won't admit it, so he just yells at Kunan to shut his mouth. Later that night, Mirika returns home and gives some serious thought to what Xion said earlier today. She knows that Kunan is going to become an amazing person in the future, and if she wants to remain worthy of his partner, then she is going to have to improve herself somehow. A few days later, Xion and Mirika return to Kunan's home for his next lesson, and Kunan is so excited that he can barely contain himself. However, instead of training, Xion apparently had something else in mind for Kunan's lesson today, so he takes him to an empty office and dumps a pile of documents on the table for him to sort through. This was technically supposed to be Xion's job, but he's too lazy to do it, so he tells Kunan that he needs to get through all of these by the end of the day, and asks him to make another water bed so he can take a nap in the meantime. Since Kunan is going to be busy with this all day, Mirika won't be able to talk to him at all, so Aiko offers to make her a cup of tea while she waits. However, Mirika declines and says she actually has a favor she would like to ask for. Mirika tells Iko that she would like to practice her swordsmanship in her free time while she's here, but she asks her to keep this a secret from Kunan since she doesn't want him finding out until she has gotten good enough to be worthy of him. While Mirika is training outside, Kunan is still busy organizing all of Xion's documents, but it's incredibly difficult since Xion's handwriting practically qualifies him to be a doctor. A little while later, Zeon finally wakes up from his nap and asks Kunan if he is done with the documents yet, but Kunan tells him he's still only halfway through them. Zeon tells Kunan he's way too slow at this, but Kunan defends himself and says he would have been done by now if Zeon didn't have the penmanship of a toddler. Half of the documents are completely indecipherable, so Kunan has pretty much been forced to figure out most of the theories on his own just so he could rewrite them in something that doesn't look like chicken scratch. Zeon can't deny that his handwriting is an absolute mess, but he says this is an important part of Kunan's training, because there's a difference between information and knowledge. If Kunan had simply been reading the documents, then all he would be getting is information. But since the handwriting is so bad, he is practically forced to decipher all the theories on his own instead of just reading them, and that makes it much more likely that he will actually remember the concept later on. That makes a lot of sense. So Kunan thanks Zeon for being such a good teacher, but this is still just a way for Zeon to pawn off his work on Kunan. By the end of the day, it's time for Zeon and Marika to leave, but Kunan still has a few questions to ask because he remembers seeing a diagram of a spell in one of the documents, and he was wondering what it's about. Zeon knows what Kunan is talking about, but it would be easier to show him rather than explain it here. So he tells Kunan to come to the Black Tower when it's time for their next lesson. A few days later, Kunan arrives at the Black Tower, and all the royal sorcerers are glad to see him again. They are excited to see more of Kunan's magic, but Zeon cuts the fun short and tells everyone that Kunan is here to see him, so they need to back off. He then tells Kunan to follow him, but when Raisha and the others realize that Zeon is trying to get Kunan to come to his room, they all try to stop him because it's way too dangerous in there for a kid. However, Zeon already thought of the perfect counter to this situation, so he tells Kunan to create a few water beds, and the others immediately fall asleep on them because they can't resist. The two start heading towards Zeon's room, and along the way, Zeon starts talking to Kunan about magic tools. There are items made to operate using magic, like that lamp over there, and a lot of magic engineers dedicate themselves to creating magic tools to solve everyday problems. A little while later, Kunan and Zeon arrive at his office, and the place is full of so many research papers with magic theories Kunan has never even heard of before. Zeon tells him he is free to read as many of those as he wants, but the real reason he brought Kunan up here was to show him this. This is a magic tool that Zeon has been working on recently, and it is meant to allow him to have hot meals in his room without having to go to the cafeteria. So far, he hasn't had any trouble making the solid parts of the device, but the soft sections have been quite difficult to perfect, which is where Kunan comes in. Zeon tells Kunan he's going to be helping with the development of this magic tool as part of his training, and Kunan seems happy to help. But just then, the Grand Master comes in, and he really wants to talk to Kunan, so he asks him to join him in the cafeteria for lunch today. Zeon and Kunan don't really have time to waste chatting over lunch, so Zeon tells Kunan to make another water bed, and just like the others, the Grand Mage falls asleep in seconds. Now that he has been taken care of, Kunan and Zeon get back to talking about the magic device, and Zeon says he will handle the outer frame of the device with earth magic, but the small internal mechanisms are going to be up to Kunan. A little while later, after everyone has woken up from their naps, they all head down to the cafeteria to have lunch, and they are all still really excited to talk to Kunan. They keep telling him that he's allowed to switch teachers if he wants to, but Kunan says he's happy working under Zeon, and hearing him say that makes all the other sorcerers jealous. Kunan keeps praising Zeon for being such a good teacher, and it's nice to be appreciated, but Zeon tells him to cut it out because at this rate, he's going to get jumped by the others in a parking lot. Kunan changes topics and asks Raisha where Marika is because he would like to have tea with her before he leaves for the day. Raisha informs him that she is currently at the entrance ceremony of the senior school for nobles today, so she isn't going to be able to see him today. Kunan knew Marika was going for higher education, but he had no idea that it had already started. The Grand Master asks Kunan what he intends to do now, and he doesn't really like the idea of being stuck in a classroom all day, but if it's necessary for him to graduate, then he's just going to take the graduation exam like he did last time. The Grand Master asks him if he's sure he doesn't want to go to school, because with his talent, the Magic Academy would be a great fit for him. Kunan had never heard of the magic school before this. So the Grand Master explained that it is the institution which all royal sorcerers and even sorcerers from all over the world attend in order to learn everything there is to know about magic. You need to be at least 12 years old in order to attend, so Kunan wouldn't be able to go for another 2 years, but even Zeon thinks it would be a good idea, so he tells Kunan to give it some thought. 2 years go by, and Kunan's training has been progressing quite smoothly. He can even cast 55 section spells that are on par with Zeon's spell now, so you can tell that he has become a decently powerful mage. After today's training is over, everyone heads inside to enjoy some piping hot pie, courtesy of the now completed lunchbox magic tool. It works just as intended, and it is already really popular all around the kingdom, but Kunan is a bit pissed that Xian took all the royalties for the invention even though he did half the work on it. In total, Kunan and Xian have collaborated on 8 magic tools and 5 magic theory papers so far, and Kunan is still eager to work on more. But all of a sudden, Xian says he will handle the rest of the work on his own. Kunan reminds him that they still have to work on that insect trapping magic device because it's not done yet, but Xian once again tells him that he can handle it on his own, and Kunan is starting to get the feeling that Xian is trying to get rid of him. Xian reminds Kunan that his birthday is coming up soon, and that means he's going to turn 12, which means he can officially join the magic school, so he should be focusing on that instead. Kunan tells Xian that he doesn't want to go, because after all, he can just keep learning from Xian, but Xian tells him he can't do that. Kunan is a water mage while Xian is an earth mage, so there are many things he will never be able to teach Kunan regardless of how skilled he may be. However, if Kunan were to go to the magic school, there's a chance that he may meet an exceptional water mage, because while Xian may be the best mage in the kingdom of Hulia, there are still many mages outside the kingdom who might be better than him. Kunan knows Xian is right, but he is still hesitant to leave his master and home behind to attend the magic school. However, Mirka suddenly grabs his hand and tells him she thinks he should go. She wants him to become the best he can possibly be, and she assures him that by the time he returns, she would have become a woman worthy of standing by his side. Kunan is touched by Mirka's sincerity, so he agrees to go to the magic school and asks where it's located, but then he finds out that it's really far away, and now he doesn't want to go anymore. He is eventually persuaded into agreeing again, but since the school is so far away, he won't be able to return home for a while, so he asks what he's going to need to do to prepare for the magic school. Xian tells him he needs to remember not to lose sight of what's important to him, and hearing those words reminds Kunan of the whole reason he began his magic journey in the first place, to create a set of eyes for himself. He had forgotten because his magic allowed him to do most things without difficulty, but it was never meant to be a substitute for the real thing, so he couldn't believe he let himself grow so complacent. Over the past 2 years, Xian has taught Kunan how to cast magic with up to 55 layers, 3-dimensional magic circles, imaginary magic code, and many other techniques. But even Xian has never heard of magic being used to create eyes before, so it's entirely up to Kunan to figure out how to do it on his own. But Xian is sure he will find a way to pull it off. After all, he's his beloved student. Meanwhile, back at Kunan's house, he has decided to devote all his time to researching how to create magic eyeballs, and the first thing he tries is making a water ball that is extremely reflective. This works well as a mirror, but the images on it aren't transmitted to Kunan, so it is pretty much useless unless he can find a way to transmit the image to his brain. Throughout the rest of the day, he tries many variations of his mirror idea, but none of them work, and by nightfall, he is feeling completely drained. He is completely out of ideas, so to clear his head, he goes to Ixio's room and asks him if he wants to go to the sauna together. Ixio is really excited because it's not every day he gets to enjoy one of Kunan's famous sauna treatments, so he asks if he should go wake their parents up. Kunan says he wouldn't want to bother them this late at night, but Ixio knows they love the sauna just as much as he does, so they would be upset if he didn't wake them up for it. A little while later, the entire family gathers in the sauna together, and Kunan fills it with steam so they can all enjoy the heat. Ixio asks Kunan why he suddenly wanted to use the sauna this late at night, since this is rare for him. So he explains that he has been working on his biggest project recently, but he hit a block. The others immediately realize that he's talking about his magic eyeballs, but there's not much they can do to aid his research, so Ixio just tells him that if he ever needs a break, he can always come to them. The next day, Kunan is having breakfast in his room, and he starts thinking about how kind everyone in his family is to him. And he thinks to himself that the first thing he wants to do when he creates his new eyes is take a long look at all the faces of the people he cares about. Sometime later, Kunan finally makes some significant progress with his eyeballs. By using a water mirror as the base and applying a real logic sand pattern, it can now track moving views and transmit them directly to Kunan's mind. With this, he finally gets his first taste of true vision, and he is overwhelmed by how beautiful everything looks, but while he is taking in the wonderful sights, he suddenly notices a giant crab behind him, and he gets the feeling this isn't supposed to be here. He decides to ignore it for now since this is a special moment, and he had already coded that the first thing he would do after gaining vision would be taking a long, hard look at himself. So he creates a mirror and begins staring at himself. Unfortunately, he realizes that his face looks kind of mid, so the reveal wasn't as impactful as he was hoping it would be. Anyway, now that that's done, Kunan turns to the giant crab and asks what it's doing here, because this definitely isn't normal. The crab remains silent, and for a second, Kunan considers the possibility that this might be Aiko's true form, but that hypothesis gets proven wrong as she barges into the room a moment later. Her sudden entrance startles Kunan so much that he ends up stumbling into the crab, but as he does so, he realizes that the crab isn't really there. He can still see it, but his hand goes right through when he tries to touch it, and it's really confusing to him. Aiko is also a little confused as to why Kunan is waving his arm in the air, but then she notices the magic eyeball thing floating next to him, and she realizes that he must have accomplished his goal. She is incredibly happy and gives him a big hug, but she accidentally knocks the magic eye away, and all the spinning makes Kunan really dizzy. Aiko apologizes for bumping into his eye, but since this is a special occasion, she asks if he would like her to make a special feast to celebrate. Kunan likes the sound of that, but there's still the small issue of the giant crab standing in the middle of the room, and Aiko seems to have no idea that it's there at all. And to make things even more confusing, for some reason, Kunan sees a black horn on Aiko's head, but she has never mentioned having a horn before, and she doesn't seem to know that it's there. Kunan really doesn't know what to make of this situation, so he decides to just let it go for now and deal with it later. In the meantime, he heads out to get his first true taste of the outside world, and you'd think he'd be blown away by the beautiful scenery of the fields, but with his magic vision, what he sees is a bleak expanse of land with a black sun and a gloomy atmosphere. This is not what he was expecting at all, but he has never seen the sky before, so he can't tell if this is normal or not. Aiko soon joins him outside since they are about to head to the main building to inform the others of his sight, but Kunan is still rather concerned because the crab is following him now, and Aiko still can't see it. When they eventually arrive at the main house, Ixio and Kunan's mother are overjoyed by the news that he can now see, and Kunan is happy to see them as well, but for some reason, Ixio has wings, and his mother has heterochromia. They both look really cool to Kunan, but just like with Aiko's horn, he is the only one who can see it, and he still doesn't know why. A few moments later, Kunan's father comes running up the stairs because he was just informed of Kunan's sight, and Kunan was expecting him to have an invisible feature similar to what the others have, but to his surprise, his father looks like a walking calamity on par with Anti-Spiral. None of them seem to have any idea about their invisible features, so there would likely be no point talking to them about it, so Kunan decides to wait and ask Xion for advice when he gets the chance. News of Kunan's achievement soon reaches the royal castle. Xion is informed that he has been permitted to leave the castle to visit even though he's no longer Kunan's instructor since this is a special occasion. Later that day, the carriage from the castle arrives and Marika is the first to come out and greet Kunan. She tells him she's really happy he was able to achieve his dream and asks to see how the spell works. Kunan obliges and forms his magic eye, explaining that it reflects all images and transmits them directly to his brain, though his actual eyes still need to be open for him to see anything. On that note, Marika notices that Kunan's eyes have been closed this entire time, so she asks him to take a look at her, but Kunan is a little nervous because he doesn't know what Marika is going to look like. He slowly opens his eyes and looks in Marika's direction, and thankfully, she looks perfectly normal and as beautiful as Kunan had imagined, though she does have a feather sticking out of her head. But that's something Kunan can just ignore. Dario soon arrives as well to congratulate Kunan on his achievements, and in Kunan's eyes, he looks like he has some kind of legendary sword on his back. But that's nothing compared to what Kunan sees when Xion finally arrives, because he straight up looks like a being of pure light. He is having a hard time looking directly at Xion because he's too bright, and at first, Xion thinks Kunan is just messing around, but Kunan tells him he genuinely looks like a max brightness phone in the middle of the night. Kunan asks Xion to join him inside because he has something he wants to discuss in private, and Xion agrees, so he follows Kunan inside. While they do this, Marika heads out to the garden to continue her training with Dario as usual, and inside, Kunan informs Xion of everything that has happened since he gained his vision, including the giant crab that's following him everywhere he goes and the random features he keeps spotting on people. Xion finds the whole thing hilarious since he has never heard anything like it before, but Kunan doesn't think it's funny, because when he eventually marries Marika and moves into villa with her, he doesn't want to have to deal with a giant crab watching everything he does. In all seriousness, Xion does believe that Kunan is telling the truth because the descriptions he has been giving seem a bit too vivid for him to have made them up. He also feels flattered by the fact that Kunan sees him as a being of light and takes pride in that even though he doesn't know what it means. There are two possibilities he can think of for Kunan's current situation at the moment, and one is that Kunan's magic eye might be allowing him to see the shape of people's souls, which is why he sees hidden features that no one else can. Kunan agrees that it's possible, but if that's the case, then it would mean his soul is a giant crab, and he doesn't want to accept that. Xion also suggests that it could be hallucinations brought about by intense magic sickness, but Kunan has never heard of magic sickness before, so he doesn't know what it means. Xion explains that in this world, there are various locations which are dense with magical energy, and he was once walking through such an area when he suddenly got hit with a sudden spell of dizziness. It felt as though he had downed 20 shots of vodka in one go, and he began to see dozens of immaterial creatures moving through the area with no physical form. That sounds really similar to what Kunan is experiencing, but there's no way to know for sure, since neither of them has much information on what this phenomenon is. Xion tells him that they will be able to learn more about it as Kunan looks at more and more things, but until then, they have to keep working on theories to find a pattern. Kunan asks him if it's possible that he just messed up the magic eye when he was creating it, which is why he's seeing all this weird stuff, but Xion tells him that's not possible, because anything that someone as brilliant as Kunan makes is bound to work. There are many creatures in nature that can't see color, some with dozens of eyes, and some with no eyes at all. There's no universally correct way to see, so it's perfectly fine for Kunan to have his own way of seeing the world. And besides, the things he's seeing might hold some significance that they haven't figured out yet. But in the meantime, he probably shouldn't tell anyone about the strange things he's seeing, since it would be a bad idea to draw attention to it before he has figured out how it works. Kunan agrees with Xion, and he's glad he chose to ask him for advice before doing anything else. But looking directly at him still hurts his eyes, so it's hard to stay focused. Late into the evening, Mirika is done with her training, but Kunan is still talking with Xion inside, and she can't leave without Xion, so she has to wait out here with Iko. Since Kunan's birthday is coming up, Mirika asks Aiko if she has any idea what a good gift for him would be, but Aiko tells her that Kunan will be happy with anything Mirika gives him, so there's no need to overthink it. A few moments later, Kunan and Xion finally come outside, but as soon as Xion sees Mirika, he bursts out in laughter because he can't stop imagining how funny she must look to Kunan since he sees her with a feather sticking out of her head. Later on, Aiko is helping Kunan clean out his office, and she asks him where she should put this pile of books, but he says he has already finished reading all of those, so she can just take them back to the main building's library. The reason he's cleaning out the office is because today is his 12th birthday, and he has officially decided to attend magic school. That evening, Kunan's family throws a party for him, and they all give him the gifts they prepared for the occasion. They are happy for him, but they are also upset that he's going to be moving so far away. Kunan's mother is taking it pretty hard because she doesn't know how she will handle not having Kunan around anymore. But Kunan assures her that no matter how far Kunan goes, he will always love her. Later that night, Kunan and Mirika are out on the balcony together, and Mirika asks how Kunan's preparations for his departure have been going. He tells her he just packed a few of his most comfortable clothes and the bare necessities because he can buy everything else he will need once he arrives. Unfortunately, Mirika has to go to school on the day Kunan is meant to leave, so she won't be there to say goodbye to him before he leaves. But Kunan understands that she has things she needs to do, so it doesn't bother him. Mirika decides that this is a good time to give Kunan the present she picked out for him, so she hands him a box, and when he opens it, he finds a beautiful bracelet inside. Mirika tells him she got a matching set for both of them to wear, and if things ever get tough for him over at the magic school, she wants him to speak to the bracelet as he would to her. And she will do the same with her bracelet so they won't miss each other too much. Kunan says he will write letters to her as often as possible as well, to which Mirika says the same, and they both promise to wait for each other no matter how long it takes. On the day Kunan is set to leave, his family gathers to see him off, and they are all fighting back tears, expecting Kunan to be just as sad as they are. But Kunan already got over the grief of leaving his family behind, so he's not too upset anymore. After all, he will only be gone for 4 or 5 years, and he's excited to see what kind of sorcerers he will meet at the magic school. And Kunan is still on his way to the magic school. Iko asks him how much longer it's going to take for them to get there, and Kunan tells her it's going to be a long while since the magic school is in a whole different kingdom, and they haven't even left the borders of Hulia yet. At this rate, it will take them about a month to arrive at the magic school, but on the bright side, they should be arriving at the mansion of Kunan's grandfather soon, so they can rest there for a bit. That said, Kunan is a bit apprehensive because Aiko has made it clear that she doesn't plan on remaining as Kunan's maid forever. She wants to get married and have a family of her own at some point, and if she plans to make that happen, then it's now or never. Kunan is still really reluctant about letting Iko leave, so Iko tells him that if he doesn't want her to leave so badly, then all he has to do is abandon Mirika and marry her instead. But they both know Kunan can't do that, so this is the way it has to be. They eventually arrive at the residence of Kunan's grandfather, and Kunan is a little excited since it has been 4 years since he last came here. At the time, he heard that his grandpa had an extensive library of magic books, so he practically guilt-tripped his parents into letting him come, but he also happens to get along great with his grandpa as well. Just then, Kunan's grandpa comes running outside to meet him, and he's absolutely overjoyed to see him again. Kunan is just as happy to see his grandpa, but the whole invisible features thing is still going to take some time to get used to because his grandpa apparently has Demon Lord horns. To commemorate Kunan's enrollment into magic school, Grandpa offers to buy him anything he wants, and when he says anything, he means that literally because the man is loaded. However, Kunan's parents already knew that something like this would happen, which is why his mother wrote a letter specifically forbidding Grandpa from spending more than 500k on a gift for Kunan. For context, that's 2 to 3 months worth of salary for Aiko, and Grandpa is really disappointed to hear that because he was planning to buy a cruise liner for Kunan. A few moments later, Kunan speaks up and asks his grandpa to call for his new maid since part of the reason he came here was so he could relieve Iko of her duties as his maid, and a minute or so later, Kunan is introduced to Rinko. Rinko is Iko's little sister, and she is pretty much exactly like Iko, but unlike Iko, she actually already has a fiancé, and Iko is a little salty about that. That said, they do get along really well. Rinko was initially a little worried when Iko recommended her to serve as the maid of the son of a marquis who possesses a hero's scar, but now that she has actually met Kunan, he seems like a really chill guy. Aiko informs Rinko that Kunan has a tendency to forget to eat when he gets really invested in his magic studies, so she's going to need to bring him sandwiches every so often to make sure he doesn't accidentally starve himself. She is sure that Rinko will get along just fine with Kunan, but after having spent so many years taking care of Kunan, Aiko would be lying if she said she wouldn't miss Kunan a lot. She warns Rinko that she had better not put any naughty ideas in Kunan's head, because she can't stand the thought of him turning into a playboy, because she put weird ideas in his head. Rinko wasn't exactly planning on turning Kunan into a pimp named Slickback, but she promises to be careful about the kind of things she exposes Kunan to. That said, there's not much she can do about women approaching him because Kunan is a kind, talented, and handsome young man, so the second he sets foot in the magic school, he's bound to be sworn by all sorts of women, so there's a good chance he might end up becoming a womanizer on his own. Aiko absolutely refuses to believe that and yells at Rinko not to say such things about Kunan because he would never do that. They end up arguing for a while before they remember that they were supposed to be making sandwiches for Kunan, so they finish up and serve Kunan, and he is completely oblivious to the conversation they were just having about him. The next morning, it's time for Kunan to leave, so Aiko knocks on his door to call him. She won't be joining him on the rest of his journey, so this may be the last time Kunan sees Iko for a while, and he wants her to know that he will miss her, especially since he is heading to an unfamiliar place, but he will be fine on his own. The two hug each other as they say goodbye, and a few minutes later, Kunan and Rinko depart for the magic school. Kunan turns to Rinko and thanks her for agreeing to be his maid, but he wonders if this arrangement is really okay, because since she's going to the magic school with him, she's going to be away from her fiancé for at least 6 or 7 years. Rinko assures him that it's fine because she already talked about it with her partner, and he's fine with waiting since she's doing this to earn money for the restaurant they want to open together. A few days later, Kunan and Rinko stop in a city to take a break, and Rinko is amazed by how many magic shops there are here. Kunan is just as impressed, but as they are walking down the street, he notices an interesting book in the window of a shop, so he decides to head in to check it out. Kunan is really intrigued by the magic books since he hasn't had many opportunities to read them, but since that's the case, Rinko tells him he can just buy this book if he wants it so bad, but Kunan tells her he would end up broke if he did that. And that's when Rinko notices that the book costs 5 million. Rinko could afford to open a whole restaurant chain if she had that kind of money, but Kunan isn't really surprised by the price since magic books are usually one of a kind, which is why they cost a fortune. The store owner overhears Kunan talking and asks him if he is a mage from the magic school. Kunan explains that he is indeed a mage, but he hasn't officially enrolled in the academy yet. The store owner is delighted to hear that Kunan is a real mage, so she asks him to show her some of his magic, and since she was polite about it, Kunan agrees. He casts a spell and creates a tiny cat in the woman's palms out of water, and she is amazed by the display because she has never seen anything like it before. Kunan asks her if she's a mage as well, but she explains that she can't use magic, she just happens to really like magic-related things, so you could call her somewhat of a magic enthusiast. She counts herself as really lucky to have met a magic school applicant like Kunan, but the applicant pool in Durashik is pretty intense this year, so she wishes him the best of luck. Kunan asks what she means by that, So she informs him that the Saint of the Holy Kingdom is apparently enrolling in the school this year, and she isn't even the only amazing person the Academy has received. Last year, they had the Inferno Prince and the Lightning Bolt from the New Kingdom. So if Kunan manages to get accepted, then he will surely become famous like the others. Meeting Kunan has put the shop owner in such a good mood that she offers to sell him one of the most popular grimoires published by the legendary mage Xion at a discounted price. But Kunan turns her down because he doesn't need it. As he and Rinko leave the store, Rinko is still in shock at the fact that grimoires can cost so much. But on that note, she asks Kunan if he's sure about declining the shopkeeper's offer because that was a significant discount. But he says buying the grimoire would have been pointless because he was the one who helped Xion write it. Next, Kunan and Rinko head to a fabric store. And there, Kunan immediately begins touching all the merchandise he can get his hands on. The owner can tell that Kunan must be some kind of nobility since he is really well dressed and came in with a maid, but he has done nothing but rub his grubby little fingers all over the merchandise since he walked in. Neither he nor Rinko has said a word so far. He yells at Kunan and tells him to stop touching all the materials, but Kunan says he just wanted to see how it felt. He asks the owner what kind of fur this is, and he is informed that it is dark fox fur, which is extremely rare and difficult to acquire, but since Kunan now knows what the fur feels like, he casually creates a dark fox, and the store owner is impressed because he didn't think that kind of thing was possible. Kunan apologizes for feeling up the store owner's merchandise without asking for permission, but he just likes collecting as many texture samples as possible so he can make his creations as accurate as possible. The owner asks Kunan if he can really create anything as long as he knows what it feels like, and after Kunan confirms this, the man's intrusive thoughts win and he ends up asking if Kunan can reproduce the feeling of thick thighs. Rinko immediately yells at the man for daring to ask Kunan such a vulgar question, and the man realizes that it was inappropriate, but Kunan answers anyway and explains that he has tried it before with Iko, but he got yelled at for it, so he hasn't had much practice. After that, Rinko drags Kunan out of the store and tells him they should continue their journey to Durashik, leaving the man feeling sorry for what he said. A few moments later, the Saint and her friends happen to walk into the man's store, and they are surprised to see him holding a dark fox, since from what they know, dark foxes hate being around humans, but the man informs them that this isn't a real fox, and upon closer inspection, the Saint realizes that this is a spell. She tries touching it, but she ends up destroying the spell and spilling the water all over the man's crotch. She apologizes for her mistake, but the Saint had never seen a spell like that before, so she and her entourage ask the shopkeeper to stand still while they examine the residual magic from the water they spilled on him. And considering her status, the man has no choice but to do as she says. But having teenage girls poke at his junk in the middle of his store was not on his bucket list today. Later on, Kunan and Rinko finally arrive at the magic school, and the first order of business is to check into the dorms, but they are shocked to find out that the dorms are already completely full. The receptionist, Lubel, informs him that students were meant to apply for dorm space way in advance, but Xion never mentioned anything like that, so Kunan had no idea. Now, he and Rinko have nowhere to stay, so Rinko suggests they could stay at a hotel, but hotels are pretty expensive long-term, and Kunan would like to save as much money as possible so he can afford any magic stuff he may need, so renting a house is the best option right now. Fortunately, Lubel happens to have a list of rental properties in the area that she keeps handy for the sake of students who can't get dorm spaces, and thanks to her help, by the end of the day, Kunan and Rinko have found a house to rent. Meanwhile, in the magic school, the staff presents a list of this year's applicants to someone in a pitch-black room, and they seem particularly interested in Kunan for some reason. The next day, it's time for Kunan to take his entry exam, but Rinko is informed that only students are allowed to head inside, so she's going to have to wait outside for him. Rinko tries to bribe Lubel with some money to get her to turn a blind eye, but that doesn't work, so she ends up having to wait while Kunan goes inside to take his test. And while he's waiting with the other applicants, they all seem really confused by the fact that he's wearing an eye mask. Kunan creates his magic eye so he can get a look at his fellow applicants, and they all have interesting hidden features, but Kunan is particularly interested in the girl over there because she seems special. He walks over to her and asks if she happens to be the saint from the Holy Kingdom, which she confirms, but she is confused as to why Kunan is talking to her since they've never met before. Kunan says he's just interested in talking to her because she's the first light element magician he has seen in real life, and he wants to learn as much as he can about it. The saint doesn't think there's any point in indulging Kunan, because she believes light magic is superior to all other forms of magic, so as a water mage, there's nothing he could learn from her. However, after she says this, the others look at her with confusion, because there is no hierarchy among the different types of magic. The saint realizes she may have been wrong and apologizes since she was just repeating what she was told at the temple, and while she has their attention, she apologizes in advance to everyone because she has been told that she lacks a lot of the emotions a normal person would have. So even though she's just speaking how she normally would, she might end up offending them unintentionally. She explains that the reason she lacks emotion is due to the effect of the hero scar she inherited, and when Kunan hears this, he gets excited because that means he and the saint could become disabled besties. The saint still has no idea what Kunan is talking about, but just then, the professor in charge of the entrance exam shows up and tells everyone to get ready to begin. Kunan takes a look at Professor Soph, and at a glance, he can tell that this man is really strong, and Seifi is strong as well. But her feature is a little underwhelming since she's just got a bunch of rats at her feet. After introducing themselves, both Soph and Seifi congratulate all four of them for their enrollment into the Dirashik Magic School, and the kids are all shocked to hear this because they haven't even done anything yet. Soph explains that at this school, you're pretty much guaranteed to be admitted as long as you're a sorcerer. The saint is surprised to hear that since she was told the entrance exam was particularly difficult, but Soph explains that they just say that to make their school seem more competitive. Besides, seeing as all four of them have magic crests, which are exceptionally rare, there's no way they wouldn't be admitted to the school. Kunan is a little disappointed since he studied really hard to make sure he would pass the test, but Soph informs him that they will still be taking a test, so his efforts weren't completely wasted. There are 3 different courses here. The first level is known as Fundamentals, where mages can learn the basics of magic if they are new to it. The second level is called Teacher Assisted, which is pretty much just regular magic classes, and the third level is called Independent Research. It basically means your magic skills are already so advanced that you're free to do whatever you want as long as you don't commit any crimes. Kunan is really excited to hear this since the idea of getting to do independent research sounds great to him. But Soph adds that the advanced class is only suited for top-tier mages, so getting into it and graduating won't be easy. Kunan is really excited because he can't wait to see what kind of test he will be given, but his optimism really seems to annoy Seifi for some reason. The first part of their assessment is a practical test, so Soph asks everyone to step forward one after the other and share the type of their crest, its rank, and the number of spells they can cast. First up is Hank, so he steps out and informs everyone that he has a 2-star fire crest and can cast 7 spells. Soph then asks him to demonstrate his most powerful spell, so Hank casts a Fire Path spell. Kunan is impressed since the fire spell may be basic, but its unique trait is the fact that it follows a path that Hank lays out using his magic energy, so its applications are endless. By the time Hank is done with his spell, he has imprinted a spiral pattern on the grass, and Soph tells him he has done well, so they move on to the next candidate. The boy's name is Rhea, and he says he has a 2-star wind crest. He also informs everyone that he can use 8 spells. Soph is impressed, and he's low-key rooting for Rhea since he also has a wind crest, but his evaluation still depends on how well he can use his magic. Rhea is about to cast his best spell, but before he does so, he warns everyone to keep their distance because his spell is a little destructive. Everyone steps back, and Rhea then raises his wand to the sky, gathering tons of magic energy before firing a massive wind blast at the ground. The spell he just used was intermediate magic, and it relies on drawing magic from the sky to create a strong gust of wind, which is really impressive to Kunan. The next candidate is Reyes, so she informs everyone that she has a 3-star light crest, and she can use a maximum of 5 spells. Her best spell is healing magic, but since no one is injured at the moment, she decides to use her second best spell, a beam of light attack magic. Kunan is astounded because a light attack like that is practically impossible to dodge unless you evade before she casts the spell, and he would love to see what else Reyes' light is capable of, but it's his turn to go up next. Kunan steps forward and informs everyone that he has a 2-star water crest, but he can only use 2 spells, the water ball spell and the bubble spell. Soph is surprised to hear that, especially since he was told to make Kunan's test especially hard. Kunan has no idea what Soph is talking about, so he explains that he received 2 recommendation letters for Kunan. One was from the Grand Mage of Hulia, and the other was from Xian, and hearing this gets all the other students' attention because they had no idea that Kunan was involved with such a famous mage. Kunan is surprised that they all know Xian, but Soph informs him that practically every mage in the education field knows who Xian is, and as it just so happens, Seifi has a bit of a rocky history with Xian, which explains why she is being hostile to Kunan as Xian's student. Anyway, since Xian was the one who asked for the test difficulty to be raised, Kunan says he's fine with it, so Soph begins and casts a wind barrier around himself, telling Kunan that he needs to find a way to defeat him like this. The others think this is an impossible challenge since Kunan only knows elementary water magic, and water spells are easily repelled by wind magic, so it should be impossible for Kunan to get to Soph like this. However, Kunan just looks at Soph with disappointment because he thought he was going to get more of a challenge. Soph thinks Kunan's confidence is interesting, but he tells him to complete the test first if he wants to complain about it being too easy, unless, of course, he's just bluffing. Kunan can't let himself lose aura in front of Reyes since he's still trying to become friends with her, so he accepts Soph's challenge and begins by creating dozens of bubbles all around Soph. Soph is impressed that Kunan could create so many, but he thinks it's pointless because bubbles like these will never be able to get through the barrier. However, Kunan isn't done yet and proceeds to multiply the number of bubbles while turning them red and swirling them around Soph's barrier. Now, if Soph dispels the barrier, he will be swept away by the bubbles, but he still doesn't think this is enough, so he tells Kunan he's going to have to step up his game. However, Kunan casually creates a water chair for himself and tells Soph that the battle is pretty much already over. Kunan can keep his bubble vortex going for 2 days straight if he needs to, and there's no time limit, so he's perfectly fine waiting for Soph to run out of stamina. After all, with a spell like that, Soph must be eating through quite a bit of his mana reserves. So Kunan predicts that he will only be able to keep this up for half a day at most. As much as Soph hates to admit it, Kunan has him beat here, so he concedes defeat, and Kunan dispels his bubble vortex. As soon as he's done, Kunan turns back to Reyes and starts asking her to show him more of her magic. Since this part of the exam is over, Soph moves all the students into a classroom, and Kunan is still pestering Reyes to get her to show him her magic. He even invites her out on a parfait date to get her interested, but Reyes turns him down because she has no interest in showing off her magic. Soph gets everyone's attention and tells Kunan to stop flirting with Reyes because it's time for the next step of the exam, and it's important that he doesn't disturb Reyes' peace of mind before the interview. Kunan says he understands, and Seifi proceeds to call Hank as the first student to be interviewed. While Hank is gone, Kunan asks Soph what the interviews are about, but Soph doesn't really have an answer to that because the topic changes a lot depending on the candidate, so he will just have to wait and see. In that case, Kunan asks Soph a few questions about wind magic while he waits for his turn to be interviewed, and Soph doesn't have a problem with it, so he tells Kunan to go ahead. Once all the others have been called for their interviews, Soph asks Kunan what he intended to do if the test earlier had ended up having a time limit. Kunan says that if he didn't have the option of waiting Soph out, he was going to try to fuse his bubbles with Soph's barrier to take control of the wind. Soph asks him if he really thinks that's possible since he has never heard of a technique like that before, but even though Kunan has never tried it before, his gut tells him it should work since taking control of a spell from the inside should naturally be easier than trying to do so from the outside. He personally thinks that water magic is the most versatile since it is capable of penetrating most materials, but he can't claim it is the strongest because he has yet to figure out the details of how to do so. It is now time for Kunan's interview, so Seifi shows up to lead him to the interview room, but when Kunan arrives at the door, he's a little puzzled because his magic senses won't let him see what's beyond the door. He asks Seifi to describe the room to him. Until now, she had honestly forgotten that Kunan is blind, but she obliges and tells him that it kind of looks like nighttime in there. She asks him if he wants her to lead him inside if he can't see in there, but Kunan assures her that he will be fine on his own and walks in. This is the first time in a while that Kunan has been truly blind because even his magic eye can't see anything in here, but a moment later, his magic eye is forcibly dispelled and he finds himself surrounded by 7 figures. One of the figures starts approaching Kunan as she talks about how she used to be Xion's master, but Kunan cuts her off and asks that she not come any closer, because he has a fiancée and doesn't want to get too close to other women. The figure is confused by this since she was told Kunan was flirting with Reyes a few minutes ago, but Kunan says that wasn't flirting. He just wanted to learn about Reyes' magic, which is totally different. The figure decides to just change topics and asks Kunan if he learned anything new today, to which Kunan responds by talking about all the amazing types of magic he saw his course mates use earlier today, and he plans to find a way to incorporate those spells into his own arsenal as soon as he gets home. The figure says she is satisfied with Kunan's answer, so he will be placed in the advanced class, which Kunan is very happy to hear. She then tells Kunan that if he does well, she might even take him on as her personal student, but before she even finishes speaking, Kunan has already walked out because he wasn't interested in paying attention. Getting ignored like that kind of stung, but the figure has to admit that Kunan really is something special, because when he walked in, he tried to use a spell she had never seen before. And even though it was incomplete, she is excited to see what else Kunan can come up with. Back at Kunan's home, his parents receive a letter from Rinko informing them that Kunan has successfully passed the entrance exam and was placed in the advanced class. They are both so proud of Kunan's achievements, but then they keep reading, and Rinko also mentions that Kunan apparently overdid it a little during the exam and painted the lawn red with blood, and Kunan's father immediately flies into a rage because he can't believe Kunan would cause trouble like that on his first day of school. He considers cutting Kunan's allowance for a month as punishment, but it turns out that the school doesn't allow advanced class students to receive an allowance anyway, so it doesn't matter. When the advanced class students hear of this, they are all a bit concerned since they had no idea the school would expect them to make a living on their own, and Reyes seems to be particularly against this rule, because she stands up and tells Soph that this is unacceptable. Soph asks her what the matter is, so she tells him she came here to research magic, so she doesn't have time to figure out how to make ends meet on top of that. Soph explains that the goal here is to help them become top-tier mages, and he believes that unless they are able to make money on their own, they can never truly become top-tier, which is why this rule is established. This poses a significant problem for Reyes since her living expenses are approximately 1.5 million per month, and on top of that, she has to pay the salaries of her 2 maids who double as her bodyguards, so she has no idea what she's going to do. Afterward, everyone is taken to the private labs that they will be using to conduct their research. Since Reyes was just informed that she's essentially broke now, she gets nervous and asks Seifi if they are going to be required to pay for this space or something. Seifi explains that the lab itself is free for each of them, but they are going to be required to pay for their own research materials out of pocket. They are also free to work or slack off as much as they want, but if they don't earn enough credits by the end of the semester, they will end up being demoted to the regular class. Credits are earned by completing achievements that are accepted by a professor, so Seifi wishes them all luck on their studies since it's going to be tough. However, Kunan thinks he's going to be just fine because he's already sitting on a ton of royalty money from all his publications with Xeon, and if he ever needs more, he can just make some money as a magic engineer. He then asks Reyes what kind of job she'd want to do with her magic, and he asks if she would like to discuss it with him over dessert at a parfait shop, but Reyes turns him down. Later that day, Kunan is back at home when Rinko comes out to call him in for dinner, but she notices that he looks a little upset, so she asks him what's wrong. Kunan explains that he's sad because Reyes keeps turning down his invites no matter how many times he asks, so Rinko decides to give him some advice. She tells him he needs to be willing to let it go if Reyes keeps turning him down, because insisting too much comes off as rude, and it'll only push her even further away. Kunan says he understands, so Rinko switches topics and asks if he's going to be okay since he has to make money for himself now without an allowance. Kunan knows exactly why she's asking this, so he tells her he's still going to be able to pay her salary, so she doesn't need to worry, and Rinko is relieved to hear that. However, not everyone is in as good a position as Kunan, because right now, Reyes is having dinner with her maids, and since it has been confirmed that Reyes isn't allowed to receive any money or food from her family, they are in a tight pinch right now. One of her maids feels bad and tells Reyes that she's willing to work without pay for a while, and Reyes is happy to hear that since it would reduce the burden on her. But the maid takes it back a moment later, because she really needs her salary. Normally, a mage in this position would just use their magic skills to earn money, but Reyes doesn't have that luxury, because the church explicitly forbids her from using her healing magic for monetary gain, so she's kind of screwed here. The next day, Reyes drags herself into school, and she looks terrible because she was up all night trying to figure out how to pay for her living expenses. But as she is walking through the halls, she notices a bunch of students lining up in front of Kunan's lab. She asks the others what's going on, so they tell her that Kunan recently started a business, and it's a huge hit. They see a very tired-looking girl pay Kunan for a 60-minute sleep session, and after signing her in, Kunan leads her into his lab to get her settled in. The rest of the students are eagerly awaiting their turns, but unfortunately, Kunan has limited lab space, and all the slots are full, so he apologizes and tells them they are going to have to wait 30 more minutes to get a slot. All the commotion draws the attention of Soph and Seifi, so they come over to check on what's going on, and they are honestly impressed by how well Kunan's business is doing. Soph asks Kunan if he could explain what he's got going on here, so Kunan informs him that this is a sleep sanctuary. He filled his lab with a dozen magic water beds, and since they are so comfortable, all the students who suffer from research-induced insomnia are able to get some good quality sleep here. He came up with this idea because he knows just how badly intense research can mess up your sleep schedule, which is how he knew there would be no shortage of customers for his service, though he can only serve a few people at a time since he's got limited space. After hearing Kunan's pitch, even Soph is hooked, so he promises to get Kunan more lab space, and in exchange, He asks that Kunan allow the professors to pay for his services since almost everyone here is severely sleep deprived. Kunan says he would feel a little guilty charging professors for something like this, but Soph assures him that it's not a problem since all the professors would be more than happy to pay it. With that, Kunan's business gained school-wide recognition, and all his customers had nothing but good things to say about it after they were done, because it left them feeling totally energized. The good reviews draw in an endless number of new customers, so Kunan is really raking in the dough. But it looks like there are a few students who seem to have their eyes on Kunan because he's Xion's student. Later that night, back at Reyes' house, the power had been cut out since she couldn't pay the magic electricity bill, and she's starting to get depressed because she had no idea life could be this hard. One of her maids suggests that Reyes should discuss her situation with the professors, but she already tried that. And she was told that she should go ask Kunan for advice since he seems to be great when it comes to businesses. She doesn't want to do that because she thinks Kunan is a weirdo, but at this rate, if she doesn't find a way to earn money soon, she's going to be stuck eating water, soup, and air sandwiches. The next day, Reyes goes to meet Kunan, and as humiliating as this is for her, she begs him to help her. She personally didn't want to ask him for help, because there's no telling what he might demand of her in return. But Kunan tells her she doesn't have to worry about that because he would never take advantage of a friend's vulnerability. He may ask her to return the favor someday, but he promises not to make any unreasonable requests. That said, to make sure there are no misunderstandings, he asks Seifi to come in and act as a witness to their discussion. Kunan is already aware that Reyes needs money, so he asks why she doesn't just open a healing business since there are tons of people who would pay to have their injuries healed. However, Reyes tells him she can't do that because it is strictly against the rules of the church or use holy healing power for personal gain. In that case, Kunan looks into alternatives, and he mentions that some researchers in the school are willing to pay for the collection of research data, but learning to do that would take too much time considering Reyes' dire financial state. Just then, Kunan comes up with an idea and asks Reyes if there are any rules against her using purification magic for personal gain, and the church's restrictions say nothing about that, so Kunan suggests that he could work together with Reyes to develop a magic item. Seifi steps in at this point and tells Kunan to slow down a bit, because while she understands that Kunan is trying to do something nice for Reyes, things tend to get tricky when it comes to dual ownership of magic item patent rights, so maybe he should put a little more thought into this. Kunan says he doesn't mind letting Reyes be the lead on the project since she needs the money right now, and they can just work out the finer details later. He asks Reyes if she agrees to work with him, but it's not like she has much of a choice, so she tells him she's in, and Kunan is really happy to hear that because it means he finally gets to experiment with Reyes' magic. Kunan calls for a little help from Professor Surya, an instructor who also possesses the light attribute, and he happens to be on really good terms with her because she has benefited a lot from Kunan's sleep business. She tells Kunan she managed to acquire the seed he asked for, so she hands them over to him, and when Kunan opens the box, Reyes is surprised to see that it contains shishula seeds. Shishula is a sacred herb, and it's extremely valuable, so Kunan plans to grow some so Reyes can sell them for a profit. Reyes tells him that's impossible because shishula seeds can only grow on Holy Land, but Kunan did a bit of research into the topic, and apparently, Holy Land is just land that naturally possesses holy magic and purification magic, so he figured they would be able to recreate the same effect by having Reyes use her Holy Sanctum spell. Sharia is also interested in seeing if it works out, so they all gather around as Reyes casts the spell under Kunan's instruction. And a moment later, a barrier of holy light forms around the seeds, causing them to sprout. Both Sharia and Kunan are ecstatic that the experiment was a success, and Kunan begins excitedly documenting everything he learned from witnessing Reyes' magic, and seeing Kunan so elated makes Reyes realize that all those times he kept bothering her. He really wasn't trying to flirt, he was just really eager to experiment with her magic. However, that's only half right because while Kunan may not be interested in her romantically, he never misses a chance to make flirty comments, so mid-report. He notices Reyes staring at him and asks if she has fallen in love with him by chance, but Reyes completely denies it. Kunan is relieved that the experiment worked out, because that means his 1 million investments didn't go to waste. Reyes asks what he's talking about, so Surya explains that the shishula seeds that they use cost 200,000 each, since students are required to pay for their research materials, but Reyes didn't have any money to pay for it, so Kunan used 1 million of his own money to fund the experiment, and he planned to have Reyes pay him back after selling the medicine if the experiment turned out to be a success. That also means he was willing to take a loss if the experiment turned out to be a failure, and Reyes is very grateful for Kunan's help, so she turns and sincerely thanks him for looking out for her. The next step is to process the herb into medicine, so Shuria helps by teaching them the preparation process, and with a little help from Kunon's bubble magic, several Shishila herb pills are refined. They then head out to sell the medicine, and Kunan helps Reyes secure a sale contract for 2 million per batch, so she won't have to worry about money anymore. And to celebrate, Kunan decides to treat Reyes and her maids to lunch. The maids are extremely grateful to Kunan since thanks to him, they can finally get paid again, and since they've pretty much been starving over the past few days, Kunan tells them they can order whatever they want from the menu because he wants to do something nice for them. However, a few hours later, Kunan is looking deflated because that meal ended up costing him 220,000. He knows he said they could order whatever they wanted, but he didn't expect the maids to start ordering expensive wine when he said that. He takes this as a lesson to be more careful about when he offers freebies, but as he is walking to his lab, he notices that Hank and Rhea are standing outside his door. He asks them what they want, and they inform Kunan that they are also kind of stumped when it comes to making money with their magic, so they were hoping Kunan could help. At first, Kunan was going to ignore them, but they look like they could really use his assistance, so he tells them he will help in exchange for them doing some experiments with him. Specifically, he wants Hank to use his fire magic to cook some bacon, and he wants Rhea to use his wind magic to try flying. Meanwhile, in Kunan's sleep sanctuary, the three girls who have been spying on him run into each other, and they immediately realize that they are all after him, so they don't get along well. This was the end of episode 10. Subscribe to not miss the next part.